afternoon.
Dear Lord, as some of us have entered into the Sabbath and some of us are yet to get there. We just want to lift up Manuel and all the health challenges he's had to face after experiencing COVID. He's had a very hard time and very long illness and a lot of serious issues that he doesn't know what to do. We pray, Lord, that you give him strength and comfort and peace and help him in his decision making as well. We know, Lord, that he loves you. We know that Ava loves you. They are faithful. Help them to have peace when it comes to baptism. Not all will be able to get baptized, and that's okay. We just ask you to watch over them and take care of them and help us, Lord, that in any way that we can help through prayer, anything that we can do to help, Lord. May you guide us and direct us. We don't like that any of us are to be hindered from the great work that you've called us to do, to deal with sickness, and pain, and sorrow, and suffering. But it does seem, Lord, that many of us have various challenges, and some far greater than others. We know that you've called us for a purpose, and we just pray that in whatever capacity that we can, we are faithful to you. We are faithful to you. Whatever happens on this side of things, we remain faithful and strong. I pray tonight for our study as we continue to review, that we would come always closer to a greater understanding of what it is that you are leading and teaching us. For I know myself, Lord, many struggle with being slow to understand. And so much to undo with the rewiring of our brains. And we make mistakes along the way. We thank you for your goodness and mercy towards us as we strive to endure every step of the way. May you bless us tonight in this review. Bless our presenters. May we all grow in wisdom, courage, humility, and faith. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Tonight we're going to be reviewing the three structures that was given by Elder Tesh, December 31st, 2020, during the Hold the Rope camp meeting in Germany.
Okay, we're stuck. Oh, there you go.
We will start with a review. We constructed a line of the 144,000 and the line of the priests. We placed ourselves between Raphia and Panium as between 2019 and 2021. Between the increase of knowledge and the formalization of the early reign of the 144,000. The increase of knowledge has come last year the increase of knowledge of the Sunday law, our preparation for the Sunday law. It started in February in Brazil, and it didn't start by taking us to the Millerite history or slavery. It started by taking us to 1888, and it essentially said, you Adventists love 1888 so much, you do not understand the external. We don't understand the external history fight of A.T. Jones, what he and others were standing for and fighting against. We made the statement, we face a similar fight today about church and state. Adventism is on the wrong side, and the litmus test was 2015, gay marriage. So we started in 2019 with the 1888 history. God entered that entering wedge of you don't understand 1888 itself. He is saying to his people, you don't understand how church and state works. And then by August, he's shown us we'd forgotten Millerite history, when there was a different sin in the cup of America. Ellen White says in about 1868, Christ should have come back. We can easily demonstrate. The sin that overthrew America in that history was not Sunday. The Sabbath Sunday issue was there because in Alpha history is always the reintroduction of the Sabbath. And God's people would have ended up persecuted for that. But that does not make it the sin that filled the cup.
We spoke in our previous study about how a waymark is a period of time. We have three histories of modern Israel: Millerite, 1888, and us. He started by showing us 1888 in February and Millerite in August. The review of these two histories changed our understanding of the Sunday law in our history. It was a period of time. Their 144,000 increase of knowledge, just as ours was this year, because a waymark is a story. We stand in the swelling of the understanding of the Sunday law, heading towards a formalization. We also stand on the line of the priests, quite at the same place as a fractal heading towards formalization. We know that this is a subject of marriage and equality.
We discussed 1998 as the time of the end. We decided to view it the way Ellen White does, that we are in the time of the end at each point from 1798. In 1910, if Ellen White wants to say she's in the time of the end, that's accurate. Everything that occurred since 1798 is in the time of the end. God has given us different models to help break down this time period to make sense of what is happening externally. He is lifting the curtain on the great controversy so we can see the players behind it, how this conflict has been fought in the time of the end. Now, if people want to write in the chat the three structures that I mentioned yesterday, that he's given us three different structures with three different themes to make three different points or three different overlaying applications. If you can think of any other structures, please write in the chat. If there's another structure that we can take to the end, to the time of the end.
So the three I mentioned yesterday of our study, the first one, the structure of the modern Israel. I guess from the chat, somebody had mentioned Egypt, Babylon, and Rome. but she says that's a structure we can see as an evidence of the modern Israel. And Elder Hess says that she's looking particularly for the three structures of the time of the end. So what is modern Israel's three histories? Millerite, 1888, and 144,000. Millerite being failure, 1888 being failure, and 144,000 being success. So now what's the second structure we looked at?
The counterfeit. What's the theme of modern Israel? Who is the subject matter? God's people. I'm just going to call it Adventism. Who is the subject of the counterfeit? The papacy. I'm not going to say anything more than that. It's just a comment, and some people may object to it. If Christ had returned in 1863, the papacy would never have gotten its boots on, would have been honored by Protestantism, but the papacy was not strong. That didn't happen. So in 1899, the papacy is able to ready itself.
How many histories are there for the papacy? 3. And what are they? It has to be 3 because it's counterfeit. What's the alpha history of the counterfeit? The alpha history is at 1899 to 1945, and that encapsulates both world wars. World War I and World War II are both part of the first history. In the first history, it's World War I, World War II, and the first and second angels' messages. It's not World War I for World War I first history, World War II second history, World War III third history. It's that its first history is World War I and II, and the first and second angels' message. World War III is in the third history. Yeah.
"1798 is the work of Miller and Snow. The first and second angels' message of 1798 to 1844, 46 years. 1899 to 1945 is 46 years of the Alpha history counterfeit. 1798, resurrected by the message of Miller and Snow. 1844, disappointment and failure, and they are scattered. 1899, resurrected by World War I and World War II. 1945, disappointed and scattered. 46 years and 46 years.
What is the counterfeit's second history of failure? Pope John Paul II, the history of 1989, the takedown of the Soviet Union. The angry Pope did not get what he wanted. When does their history of success start? In 2001. So again, with the counterfeit, we have the 1899 to 1945, that's failure. The 1989, that's also failure. But the 2001 with both Benedict and Francis, that's a period of success. Again, here, 1899 to 1945 is Pope Pius XII. 1989 is John Paul II. And in 2001, you have both Benedict and Francis. And the counterfeit is getting closer.
The third model taught yesterday, In God We Trust, which is the subject of this camp meeting. What is the theme of this structure? We have Adventism for modern Israel, the papacy for the counterfeit. What is the theme of our third structure? The papacy is church and state. This third structure is Protestantism. We see three histories in this structure. Both the study of last year and this document say there are three movements to make America a Christian nation. In Millerite history, they didn't really need to do this. Just after the Second Great Awakening, it practically was. But when that history is a failure, Protestantism mobilizes in three histories. What are these three histories?
I'm having a hard time going to the next page. So in the third structure, In God We Trust, we have the theme is Protestantism. In the first period from 1863 to 1900, the Christian Amendment movement. And the second period was the 1950s. That also started in the 1940s. That's the Judeo-Christian nationalism. And in 1979 to Sunday law, or at least the Sunday law, it's the new Christian right.
Like the two histories above them, the two structures, the first history was failure for them. What Ellen White was framing as would be a success when she says the movements now in progress will imminently introduce the Sunday law. Just as she said back in Millerite history that Christ would return in your lifetime. She frames this as if they were a history of success. She has to. Then in the 1888 history or the second history, all through the Great Controversy, she frames that as a history of success. She has to, but they failed. Jones failed and Wagner failed. So in the Protestant structure, we have a history of failure, a history of failure, and a history of success.
There were some comments from the chat when Elder Tess was presenting. And it goes like this: if people understand other structures to break down the time of the end history, I'm not saying that they don't exist. Please mention them as you might think of them. I don't think the 10-year history can be used as a structure to break it down this way. Everything people are mentioning, I would suggest give us more information on these three structures. Ancient Israel is going to give us explanation on the structure of modern Israel.
As we continue to note the comments that are in the chat, question was, do we have more than these three structures to break down the time of the end? And I'm suggesting that the ones so far mentioned give more detail on these three structures. There might be something to the three woes, so that's a good point. I'm suggesting that these three are the key structures God has given us to break down: Adventism, papacy, and Protestantism. However much they differ in time in the histories of failure, now they all run together because we're heading to a point of conflict at the Sunday law. So all three groups are mobilized.
When I started a series in May, this is Elder Tess talking, I was determined that the subject of the study needed to be Millerite history. And I found it personally frustrating when I kept getting distracted from that in what seems to be this study of just this history of Protestantism. I couldn't verbalize it then, but God was moving us from the structure of modern Israel to the structure of In God We Trust. And I found that frustrating. So looking back, I fought him a little because I wanted to talk about modern Israel, not In God We Trust. I guess referencing Elder Parminder's presentation, it encourages me that when we get out of line, God kicks us back into the path he wants us to take, even if we get frustrated with him.
We did lay out Millerite history at the Oceania camp meeting. We did need to understand Millerite history, especially in the context of the election. But where we were particularly meant to be turning to was the history of Protestantism. So at this camp meeting, it's the third structure that we are revisiting, which is why we have sent out this document as study material, which, as you all know, covers the exact same three histories, which I would suggest is from a very reliable source. I don't know if you've read the other material of Jared A. Goldstein. I haven't yet, but I'm particularly interested in his one on nationalism. We discussed yesterday the author.
So in the time of the end history, there are three structures, helping us break down failure, and success of Adventism, failure, and success of the papacy, and failure, success of Protestantism.
We're going to work through this document. The whole of it cannot be read. So a couple of disclaimer. When I read, that's Elder Tess, I'm likely to be paraphrasing. Some might be paraphrased, some might be summarized, and we're going to have to skip large portions to get to the points. I'm going to assume or hope that people have been able to read it, and the parts I skip are not insignificant. Please don't ignore the parts that I skip, but we're limited on time. Then we will supplement as we go through from three sources.
The second document, it discusses the Covenanters, the most relevant branch of Protestantism to this history. We're going to go into the Covenanters and discuss their founder, who was John Knox in Scotland. Second one, then we'll also use A.T. Jones. And the third, the book Evangelicals, The Struggle to Shape America by Francis Fitzgerald. Elder Tess won't be quoting from that book because it's difficult, but she'll be making some blanket statements and say that this is found in the book if it's the reference.
So we'll turn to the document, How the Constitution Became Christian. This document begins with an introduction. Then it is divided into three parts: the introduction, the fight to make the Constitution Christian, the first history of 1863 to 1900s, Judeo-Christian nationalism of the Eisenhower era, and the second history, the 1950s, the constitutional nationalism of the New Christian Right, 1979, to the Sunday law history, and then a conclusion.
So it has an introduction, three histories, and then a conclusion. We're going to go through the introduction fairly quickly, and if you have heard Elder Parminder talk about the principles of good writing, you say what you're going to say, you repeat it again, and then you repeat it again. He follows that exactly. He says practically everything in the introduction, but I don't want to go into that too much detail there because we're going to work through each history in three parts. Even though there's so much in the introduction that is loaded, we'll keep moving.
First sentence, he says, movements dedicated to make the United States a Christian nation have been a recurring feature in American politics for more than 150 years. Now, in the first history, 1863 to 1900, They denounced the Constitution as a godless document unworthy of a Christian nation and fought to amend it. In contrast, our history that came together in the 1970s, they hold up the Constitution as the highest expression of the nation's Christian identity. The purpose of this document is to discuss how it went from being hated to being lauded.
In the third paragraph, they'll understand the conflict over the Constitution by discussing these three movements. He showed how these movements were different. In the first history, hate the Constitution, and in the first history, hate the Constitution, and in our history, love the Constitution. Now he wishes to make the point that they're similar. They follow a similar pattern. I hope you can see he's taken three histories. He began by contrasting them, but now he's going to compare them. He's using the rules of parable teaching.
And how they're similar, he's going to say that there's a dominant religious group. They observe a perceived threat to their dominance, so they mobilize. They believe that their Christian devotion is part of America's essence, so any perceived threat to their Protestant faith, they can interpret as a nationalistic attack on America's identity itself. And they have to preserve their identity by either amending the Constitution in the first history when they hated it, or interpreting it their way when they loved it in our history.
In the last paragraph, quote, through this reoccurring pattern in which a threat to group status is understood in nationalist terms, unquote. So there's nationalism through this because of how they interpret national identity. So this reoccurring pattern is a dominant religious group. Seeing a group threat, they mobilize. They make demands based on the Constitution, then they begin to fight.
I'm going to skip the first part of the introduction. We won't go into the fine details of how they fight over the Constitution, but we'll go to page 262. I just want to highlight a couple of points from each page. Their fight over the identity of the nation all centers on the Constitution. So page 262, that first paragraph, beginning as this article begins to show, open quote, as this article begins to show the relationship between the Constitution and national identity is quite different than conventional wisdom suggests, close quote.
But rather than defining what it means to be American, the Constitution has become the battleground on which disputes over national identity are fought, end quote. So people look to the Constitution to define what it means to be American. But it's like people expect too much of it. Because as he says, a libertarian will read a libertarian constitution, a progressive will read a progressive constitution, and others find in the Constitution confirmation that the nation is defined by race, ethnicity, and religion. Nativists read a nativist constitution while a white supremacist read a white constitution.
Well, it could depend what you want to see, and each group might have a point. So each group takes their different points, and they fight over this battleground, over their right to fight what America is in its essence. How readest thou? One of the issues is people expect too much because when white supremacists read a white constitution, they have a point. It's this nationalism, this idea of American exceptionalism that lifts up this document well above the status it should have. And I've never heard anyone try and frame this better than Barack Obama when he describes it as that star you follow. But he describes it as everything in motion, not with the idea that Amy Coney Barrett has, that they have to interpret it as it was understood and meant in 1798, when it was written by white nationalists and sexist nativists.
They're going back and saying it's all important what it meant then. And Barack Obama is saying this is a flawed document and everything is in motion, which means we need to reinterpret, amend anything necessary. But they're all fighting over the Constitution because Barack Obama will look at it and pick out all the progressive parts and see that as evidence that America must head in a progressive direction. It's the battleground.
In the next 3 paragraphs, he's going to briefly summarize the 3 parts that are each discussing these 3 histories.
Part 1 looks at the 19th century movement to amend the Constitution to proclaim national devotion to Jesus Christ. Quote, as this chapter will discuss, some evangelical Christians rejected the Constitution because they considered it a godless document that lacked any expression of religious devotion, end quote. This began during the Civil War and continued to the end of the century. They organized a national movement to make the Constitution Christian because their national identity was, as they perceived, threatened by other groups. He lists 4 threats: Catholics, Jews, Seventh-day Adventists, and the religious freethinkers. We'll go further into that. The last sentence of that paragraph, quote, the nation's Christian Protestant identity could be saved, the movement argued, if only the Constitution could be made Christian, end quote.
The subject of introducing a Sunday law was only a small part of that fight, one part. That was not the whole. The fight was to amend that Constitution and make it reflect their religious identity.
Then he goes to part 2, the second history that looks at the Judeo-Christian nationalism of the Eisenhower era. We might discuss this in a little more detail as to why they start using Judeo-Christian rather than in the first history Christian. Because we mark the middle history, the 1950s, as taking off in 1848. The problem is they want to force America into their Protestant structure, and they have to be very careful how they do that, because it's a few short years after 1945, and another church-state relationship just tried to do a similar thing.
Nazi Germany had tried to force its identity on its population, and Hitler gave a bad name to this identity of Christian. So they have to step very carefully in the 1950s to show they're against not just communism, but also fascism. They're going to soften what they're doing by identifying themselves with the persecuted Jews, try and separate themselves from Hitler. In 1798, Protestants are not talking about the need for a state of Israel, but they had developed that message, their understanding of the Battle of Armageddon, the need for Israel to be a nation, which occurred in 1948.
Going back to that paragraph beginning with the little opposition at 2/3 through, they succeeded in some of what they requested. Both histories of failure had some small successes. They succeeded in adding the phrases "under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance and "In God We Trust" to the national motto. But then they failed. The whole movement ground to a halt with some key Supreme Court decisions in that history. Then, as we'll discuss, so much happens in the 1960s, so much to perceive as a threat.
Part 3 examines the constitutional vision of the new Christian right, the Christian conservative movement that coalesced in the 1970s, led by televangelists Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson. He is going to again make the contrast. They're going to lift up the Constitution as a charter for a Christian nation compared to the first group that condemned the Constitution. On page 264, is going to explain or compare these histories, the repeating pattern you can identify in each.
What's the first step? First is they identify a group threat. There's a threat to their national identity, to their version of Protestant preeminence. They structure this around a nationalistic framework.
And that first step, I'm Jerry Falwell. Consider that I am, as a white evangelical male, is a prototype. Do we understand the concept of a prototype? It's that mold. Everything has to fit into that mold. You want to invent something, you create this structure, this thing, you create this pen. Someone says a template, and that's a good example. Now everything coming after this has to look like this pen, a first model of something from which other forms are just copies. So Jerry Falwell would see himself as a prototype of what an American should be. That prototype is under threat. This isn't just a religious threat. This is an attack on America itself. So they're going to cast this around a nationalistic framework, and then they're going to try to preserve their status through demands based on the Constitution. They'll look to that document to entrench their identity.
Again, what's the first step? They identify a group threat, and there's a threat to their national identity, to their version of Protestant preeminence. They structure this around a nationalistic framework, and then the Constitution demands they look to that document to entrench their identity.
He says in each of these episodes, you see the same pattern. The dominant group perceives a threat to their prototypical status, see that as a threat on the nation itself, and responds to demanding that the Constitution reflects the group's identity. Whether that be through amending the Constitution in the first history or interpreting the Constitution in the last history.
We'll stop now, and then in our next study, we're going to begin part 1. We're going into this first history. We'll try and look into the first history of failure in more detail, the scattering and the scattering gathering. I think I'm not being very good in my word choice. I would agree that's a theme, but I don't think it's a standalone structure. So you could take that theme and bring it to the first two structures. So it's probably my misuse of the word theme. We have 3 standalone structures. There may be more, but this is what we need for Adventism, the papacy, and Protestantism. Some of these other things are going to come along, and they're going to help explain and break down these 3 structures, if that makes sense.
We discuss the import of these 3 structures, how each has 3 histories. We began to go through this document. We've worked our way quickly through the introduction, and we're ready to begin with history number 1, which we will do in our next study.
That actually completes the 3 structures that Elder Tess